Good morning. My name is Myriam Sohn, and I'm Senior Scientist at BASF in the Global Technical Center Suncare in Germany. BASF is the leader manufacturer for UV filters and has developed most of latest approved UV filters. I'm working since 20 years in the suncare field, and today I would like to give you some insights into the topic sunscreen safety. But before, I would like to thank warmly Jen for having invited us to this today's summit. For practical reasons, I would like now to switch off my camera for the rest of the presentation. Let's start with the sunscreen requirements. There are 4 pillars that are all of them important UV filters and our sunscreen must comply with. First, the efficacy. UV filter must absorb UV light to prevent from UV damages. Known damages are immediate, like sunburn, when overexposure occurs, or long-term damages, like skin cancers or premature photoaging. UV filters must be photostable. They must not degrade under UV exposure. Sunscreen should be water resistant in order to maintain the protection during and after swimming, but also during sport activities. UV filters must be compatible with other cosmetic ingredients, and sunscreens should be aesthetically appealing so that consumers are likely to apply them generously and repetitively. The second pillar is the registration. Sunscreen product classification differs depending on the regions. They are either classified as cosmetics, like in Europe, or as OTC, like in the USA. But in each case, a UV filter molecule must be registered to be used in sunscreen. Registration consists in a series of tests to ensure the safety of the UV filters for humans, and the registration is done region-wise. The third pillar is the safety. Of course, sunscreens must be safe for human health. Each UV molecule must be first approved to be used in sunscreens. Safety may be reviewed when new data are available or new requirements appear, like the endocrine disrupting discussion. And finally, the freedom to operate. This point is of prime importance for manufacturers, since they must be sure not to infringe any patents from third party. The topic of today is sunscreen safety. Safety of sunscreens can actually be related to 2 endpoints. First of all, sunscreens must be safe for humans. And to ensure the safety for human use, the UV filters are registered on a positive list. The registration consists in a series of toxicological tests to ensure the UV filters are safe for humans. A UV filter molecule must be registered in each region separately, and so the main region include Europe, US, Brazil, China, Korea, Australia, Japan, and some others. And this also explains why the number and the type of approved filters may differ between the regions. In Europe, the European Commission, together with the Scientific Committee Consumer Safety, or SCCS, is responsible for evaluating the safety of the material before approval and review the data after approval. In the USA, since sunscreens are considered as OTC products, it is the FDA which is in charge of evaluating the safety of new UV filter molecules, but also to review the data of approved ones. Besides human safety, also environment safety became a major aspect. There are growing expectations or requirements of different stakeholders to evaluate and to minimize the impact of sunscreens on the environment. Very often, the environment damage is solely connected to coral reef damages. However, most of coral damages are due, for example, to the increase of water temperature and ocean acidification through the climate change, or to pollutions, or to our fishing practices. And there is no yet any harmonized criterion or tests to evaluate the safety of the ingredients on corals. In Europe, the environmental safety is monitored by ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, which puts any substance which needs further investigations in respect, for example, of persistence or bioaccumulation or toxicity on a specific list that is called the CORAP list. Here you can see the absorbance in the UV range of main UV filters approved in Europe. As you can see, there are a lot of UV filters available. Currently, 29 are approved, and the last was even approved not later than in 2020. UV filters and sunscreens are regulated by the European Commission. Now you can see on the right the most important UV filters used in the USA. So compared to Europe, you immediately see that the choice is much more restricted, and the latest and the more efficient UV filters available in Europe are not registered and not available for the US producers. So this is the case, for example, for the highly efficient and photostable UVB filter, or for the only photostable UVA filter, or also for all broad spectrum UV filters. So now, starting from those figures, if we remove all filters that are for different reasons under discussion, and which are shown here in black, it remains only the filters shown in green. And here we can see that there is even a huge difference between the situation in Europe and in the US. In Europe, there are yet a significant number of filters available to achieve the high SPF and UVA protection. In the USA, if we consider the final tentative monograph of 2019, only 2 filters, the inorganic particulate titanium dioxide and zinc oxide, remain as grays, generally recognized as safe and effective. So what is this final tentative monograph of 2019 exactly stipulating? Of the 16 UV filters approved in the US, 2 are considered as grays, 2 as not grays, and the 12 others need further investigations to be considered as grays. Only titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are grays. So this is tough because it's difficult to achieve the high requirements of SPF and UVA protection with these only 2 filters that are not the most effective ones and that are both of same nature, inorganics and particulate. Moreover, a nice sensory of sunscreen with particulate filters is difficult to be achieved. However, protection and aesthetics for sunscreen with inorganics are highly dependent on the formulation know-how and of using the right inorganic UV filters dispersion. Some dispersion might offer better sensory. And for the 12 other filters, which are organic ones, additional human test data inclusive maximal use trials, called as must studies, are required. So a must study is a dermal penetration study, which is performed for topically applied drugs. Since sunscreen belongs in the USA to OTC, the FDA also required such type of studies for the filters, not only for the new filters, but even for the grandfather's filters, as it was asked in the final tentative monograph. So what are the characteristics of this test? So the must study looks for blood plasma concentration after repeated dose. It includes all different skin types of human body. It includes different formulation composition, and the test is conducted under maximum use condition, which means maximum concentration, maximum application frequency, and maximum surface area. the FDA fixed the threshold of 0.5 nanogram filter per milliliter blood plasma. A such study finally was performed in a small-scale pilot study by the FDA itself, after the industry had not committed to do so following the final tentative monograph of 2019. So the results of the two pilot studies were published in scientific journals. Several market products containing a mixture of FDA-approved UV filters were tested. The results were that after one application, the threshold of 0.5 nanogram filter per milliliter blood plasma was exceeded and remained even 21 days after study start. This result was independent of the formulation vehicle, and the highest amount was found for oxybenzone and homosalide. The FDA, based on this study, might request more systemic toxicity data like carcinogenicity or reproduction, because the safety assessment based on these results is not possible. But the message of the FDA also was that the detection of the UV filters in blood does not mean that the filters are toxic. So this is a very important message. But we can ask ourselves which factors then actually affect skin penetration of topically applied products, and if it's possible to somehow reduce this dermal penetration. So the main contributors to dermal penetration are the lipophilicity of the test substance, its molecular weight, the ionic charge of the test material, and the concentration. Then also the vehicle, the skin area and the time of exposure, of course the status of the stratum corneum, or yet the temperature and blood flow. So the main rules to minimal dermal penetration of a molecule are: first, the test substance should have a high molecular weight, so the rule is bigger than 500 Dalton. Then the log octanol water partition coefficient should be either lower than 1 or bigger than 4. The test substance should have low functional groups in order not to interact with skin, and the melting point of the substance should be higher than 50 degrees. And so combining all these properties would result in a low or to no penetration. So now we can compare these properties for different UV filters. Here in the table, you have in orange the filters approved in the US and part of the FDA pilot studies. In green, the newest generation filters that are, for example, approved in Europe, in Brazil, and other regions. What you can see is that the main difference between the old generation filters in orange and the new generation filters in green is the molecular weight, which is much lower for the old generation filters, and which is a main contributor to dermal penetration. So the resulting dermal penetration is clearly higher for the old generation filters compared to the newest one. And so sunscreen with filters highlighted here in green will therefore result in much less skin penetration. So what is the current situation in the US? So in the US, only titanium dioxide and zinc oxide appeared as grays in the final tentative monograph of 2019. And additional toxicological tests are required for all other grandfather and organic filters, which is cost and time consuming. It is also very difficult to achieve high performance with an acceptable sensory and stable emulsion working with titanium dioxide and or zinc oxide alone. And so to circumvent this problem, sunscreen manufacturers use boosters to reach the UV performance. And boosters can be either scattering particles or film formers. But boosters can also be molecules with UV absorbing functions and are, in this case, such illegal UV filters, since these molecules have not been approved as UV filters, but they are very similar to UV filters, but have not went through the approval process for safety evaluation. So what does it mean? So here you can see the UV absorbance of 4 molecules. 2 are approved UV filters, so these are the continuous lines, octocrylene in red and ethyl salicylate in orange, and 2 are such called boosters, the dashed lines. So I prefer to use the term illegal UV filter, since as you can see, all 4 molecules perform as UV absorber. But a huge difference is their registration status. For octocrylene and ethyl salicylate, suppliers now need to provide must data as required by the FDA, whereas the boosters, which as you can see have the same chromophore and a very similar structure, can be used without any further safety tests. Here are some examples of US products containing such boosters. So by asking finally for additional data to prove safety of already registered organic UV filters, the FDA finally might open the door to use UV molecules not tested at all. What is the situation in Europe regarding boosters? The Cosmetic Directive clearly states that market products cannot UV filters other than those listed in the Annex 6, implying that molecules with inherent absorbance and not listed in the Annex 6 of the EC regulation are forbidden. Boosters have no SCCS opinion, which means that they were not tested regarding their safety, like an official UV filter molecule. And the issue of using non-official registered UV filters was addressed by several organizations, and even few market products had to be removed from the market due to the use of such boosters or non-registered molecules showing UV absorbance. In this frame, also in Europe, the European Commission published very recently a safety alert against a sunscreen containing titanium dioxide, zinc oxide, and a booster because of its insufficient protection. Safety of sunscreen, the situation in Europe. So the Scientific Committee for Consumer Safety, or SCCS, is in charge of evaluating the safety of the new UV filters, but also of reviewing the safety of already approved UV filters. The maximum concentration in this frame of some registered UV filters has even been recently adjusted. And there is a current list of ingredients to be reviewed in respect of their potential ED, endocrine disrupting activity. On the other side, the European Chemical Agency mainly deals with the safety of chemicals for the environment through the REACH registration of all chemicals and also through the so-called CORAP list, which lists substances that may pose a risk to the environment and which need further investigations. As already mentioned, regarding corals, there is no official or harmonized test existing yet. In Europe and over the globe, there are 2 main filters, octocrylene and octinoxate, that are heavily discussed, and this for different motivation, like their endocrine activity, suspicion, or their persistence and bioaccumulation in the environment. Also, some studies published their potential impact on coral reef viability. And for all those concerns, there is a clear trend of removing octocrylene and octinoxate in Europe in sunscreens. And this is shown in the figure on the right. Since 2015, the number of products without octocrylene and octinoxate increased exponentially. And in 2022, more than 60% of launched sunscreens are without them, compared to around 15% in 2015. And on the other side, 50% of the launched sunscreen free from these filters are bearing environmental related claim. This percentage even increased up to 80% in 2022. So these shows the clear expectations and demand for environment-friendly sunscreens. So I would like to detail a bit this aspect. So discussion on potential damage UV filters may have on the ecosystem gained really a high level of awarenesses in public debates, since they are likely to be directly released into the environment. And from the potential harmful effect, a major concern is related to the global coral bleaching. But this bleaching finally is mainly due to the climate change or pollution or physical stress like hurricanes or fishing practices. And independently, some authors investigated the impact of UV filters on reef corals, and these initiated discussions on the impact of sunscreen on corals. But it is worth mentioning that those studies provide some shortcomings in the study design and really may not be suitable to evaluate the real effect sunscreen may have on corals' viability. And as already said, there is no official and approved test protocols yet available to carefully investigate the effect of UV filters on sunscreen on coral population. But the consequence are that some governments, based on those studies, already took drastic regulatory actions by banning the sale and use of sunscreens products containing certain UV filters. And such decisions, of course, are problematic, since the use of sunscreen was demonstrated to be highly valuable for human health, for example, in the prevention of skin cancers. So countries where some filters are prohibited include, for example, Hawaii, Palau, the US Virgin Islands, and the Key West, Florida. In Brazil, the government published already a draft regulation concerning some of the UV filter substances. And in Europe, as mentioned, the filters are rather placed on a list, the CORAP list, which open requests for further evaluation. So the development of eco-friendly sunscreen is becoming a big challenge, and based on this sense of eco-responsibility, BASF developed a methodology called the EcoSun path. The objective is to evaluate the impact of sunscreens on the environment. But the effect of sunscreen should be investigated for all relevant environmental compartments and not just to limit to a single criterion. And so in this approach, we consider all relevant environmental compartments. In this sense, the parameters included are the biodegradation, the aquatic toxicity, acute and chronic, the bioaccumulation, the terrestrial toxicity, the sediment toxicity, and endocrine properties. So the EcoSun path is a tool which considers the results of study reports, European Chemical Agency websites, scientific literature, expert judgment, to provide really a highly scientific criterion for investigating the impact of sunscreen on the environment. It starts to be well established in the market, and some sunscreen manufacturers even actively promote it on the packaging, as you can see on an example on the right. So I would like now to summarize the take-home messages. Only after human safety assessment, UV filters can be registered and used in sunscreens. The regulatory status of approved UV filters can always be reviewed. The choice of the UV filters is reduced globally due to open questions of authorities regarding the environment and or the human safety. The lack of performance is sometimes filled using boosters, and these boosters are based on the same chromophores as approved filters, but have not been assessed in respect of their safety. And the penetration of organic UV filters depends on their individual properties. The reduced choice of possible UV filters will finally negatively impact the protection of the end consumer, which results in other health concern. Modern organic UV filters are designed for highest UV absorbance and best safety profile and outperform the inorganic UV filters. And finally, the EcoSun Pass offers a possibility to design more eco-compliant sunscreens. With this summary, I would like to thank all my colleagues of the Global Technical Service Sun Care and the Product Stewardship Personal Care, and thank all of you for your interest in that topic. And now I'm open and happy to answer all of your questions.